Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 904. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
I'm George Conger. Today is March 7th, 2025.
All right, welcome to another episode of Anglican Unscripted. We're glad you could be here. This is where Kevin and George sit down and we're in our happy place. We get to talk about religion and news and politics and whatever else comes across our web streams, and you guys seem to like it. We appreciate that. Because you like it, I ask one thing, only one thing of you. I don't ask a lot. I'm not begging for money. I'm not Jim and Tammy every weekend saying, gotta fill these accounts. But I do ask for the thumbs up. Yeah, George, can you give the thumbs up too? Just show them what it looks like. Yeah, if you see this anywhere on YouTube or Facebook, just click it. It lets the algorithms, and they're important, know that this show is worthy to be self-promoted. And that means YouTube will find all the Anglicans out there and some of the Christians and feed this to them. And we appreciate that. And Facebook does the same thing. It's free advertising, helps us a lot. If you've not gone to the comment section is where the show continues. Sure, you watch an hour, or on a bad day, an hour and 17 minutes of unscripted. But if that's not enough for you, you go to the comment section and you tell us what you think. Every week we talked about many different topics. We have 7 or 8 this week that we get to go through, and we want to hear your opinions on this topic as well. If you're not subscribed yet, and 58% of you have, we appreciate that. Click that little red rectangle there, click the bell, and you've subscribed, and you will get instant updates of all future episodes. I've been working on my laptop since we left for COVID. Back in Milford, I used to have 2 screens. I now have 2 screens again. So you'll see me looking left and right. I'm not distracted. Well, actually, I'm naturally distracted. I'm just trying. I got my show notes over here for now, so I don't have to wander too far. But before we get there, George, how are you doing this week?
Ash Wednesday was wonderful. We've got an exciting Lent. I'm doing a series beginning on Tuesday. I have evening classes. I'm just excited. I've said this a million times, but I do love my life. I do love what God has allowed me to do in this place.
If you really loved Ash Wednesday, you would set up a little table outside with a chair, and you would provide ashes to go. I've seen that so many times around the country in my travels. On Ash Wednesday, a little sign says ashes to go. Or one of my favorite things is to come off a subway in New York City, and there's a priest there with his little stole, and he goes, "Hey, I'll cross you." No, thank you. Thank you.
Satan, get thee behind me. Oh, it's a joke. One of my little pet peeves is ashes to go. It really was starting off, Kevin, as the thing when we began filming, and it's only gotten worse and worse and worse over these last 15, 20 years. Ick. I'm sorry, ick. I don't like it. I just don't like it. Talk about wearing your piety in public. It's just... I mean, if you watch how, I always admired Pope Benedict, and if you watch how he gets his ashes, he doesn't do it on his forehead. They would do it on the top of his head. So the ashes were there, but you didn't see them. Now, if I tried that, because most of the men in my congregation are balding, it would look like I was making fun of them. And if I touch a lady's hair, usually the wigs come off, so I've got to do the forehead. But I'm not keen about this public protestations of faith and everything that aren't backed up by any real life or living.
I mean, Ash Wednesday, the service and the intent is great, but it's one of those iffy services as far as the Christian message. And I generally, I don't like, and I'm sorry if you guys did this, people who get the ashes and instantly post a selfie on Facebook. Did you listen to the message? Did you hear the service? Okay, it's not about the thing. Now, if you had crossed the top of my head, I could get picked up on Google Maps. But it is what it is.
Oh, wow.
All right, let's move on to some international news. We've reported now on the coming death of Pope Francis, because it was certain. Now, the first week reported he was in the hospital. He had double pneumonia. He's in his 80s. Anybody knows that that's kind of the beginning or the end of the end. And he's held on now for 3 or 4 weeks. The Vatican press office reports he is back on a ventilator. He was off for a little bit. He was actually taking services, talking with people, meeting with his confidants. But he's been in the hospital now for 3 weeks. We know for certain he's in kidney failure and has pneumonia again. George, it's not humorous because we're talking about somebody's impending death, but is he dead yet? Yeah.
There have been, rumor mill has been going crazy. The Vatican official news agency has all these cardinals saying, oh, how terrible it is that people are speculating that he's dead, that he's dying. Let's just let God take, the normal course of events to its conclusion, which is a fair statement. But at the same time, we see a lot of jockeying, a lot of positioning, a pre-conclave. Conclave is how they elect a pope. A pre-conclave atmosphere is starting to form. And the potential candidates are being silent to look like they're not campaigning for it. But then the activists on special issues are starting to whip the troops in line. So we have conservatives being conservative, liberals being liberals, Francis acolytes sort of sounding each other out and saying who's going to carry the ball forward. So we pray for Francis. We pray that God's path for his life is just and good, and he know the love of the Lord. Hope that doesn't sound presumptuous of me, a non-Catholic saying.
No, it doesn't, because we always pray that God would be glorified in Pope Francis's life and in his death. And Pope Francis has certainly lived a Roman Catholic righteous life to the best of his ability, and we,
You mentioned this point, Kevin, and I'm going to steal it from you in our pre-show, that for an American, at least, there are a lot of shades of Joe Biden in the presidency, where Biden was alive, he's president, and his auto pen signed all these documents and laws and executive orders, but he was out of it, non compos mentis, for 2 years at least. And it's now all coming out. There's a recent book by former CNN correspondent Jim Acosta, basically saying, he's been crazy from the beginning. Acosta was one of those who saying, how dare you say he's not at it? Well, so if you come from an American perspective that the government institutions have been lying to us for a good long time about the competency, and you have rumors coming out of the Vatican that there's a document that Francis has signed saying if he reaches this point that he'll step back, are people hiding things from the wider church so as to ensure that, just like we saw in the Biden administration, they make sure all the things they want to get done before the time is called at the end of the day?
They don't necessarily get done, but they do get fully funded. Now, in terms of the Pope, I remember Pope Benedict decided he was going to retire and step back. And that allowed for a whole new level of uncertainty. Can there be two popes? Can there be a retired pope and a new pope? And in that uncertainty, Pope Benedict was treated pretty poorly by Pope Francis, in my humble opinion. So,
well, different men, different agendas, different ideals as to what the papacy can and can't be, should be and shouldn't be. And even though we're Protestants, we're Anglicans, when the Catholic Church catches a cold, we catch the flu. A lot of the culture is driven by Catholic worldviews. And if the Catholic Church goes soft on issues that we share in common, say on moral or doctrinal points, and we'll get to one of these at the end of the show, that undercuts a lot of our, it doesn't undercut our argument, but it undercuts our confidence in pushing those lines because we've lost an ally.
Well, we lost an ally. It also gives us a lost voice in culture. It's not that we lose our focus, but culture loses its focus on us. Well, if the Pope can be turned, anybody can be turned. If the Roman Catholic Church can fall away from its doctrines, you're not far behind.
Well, it's not to say the Catholic Church is a monolith where everybody follows the Pope, but there's a major difference between preaching and teaching a unchanging tradition and having the whole machine in back of you, and being an outlier and upholding a tradition when the masters at the top have rejected it and moved on to something new. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah,
I pray for those who in the Catholic Church are finding themselves increasingly in a tougher corner.
Sure. Let's move on to politics here in America. If you just turned on Anglican Unscripted for the first time in 6 weeks, you're going to be really freaked out. There's a new president here in America. His name is President Donald Trump. He was a previous president, a president and a half ago. So here we are. And when there's a new president of a conservative nature who is there to help save money, cut cost, and basically do something different. What presidents have done for the last 60 years is say one thing and do another. We're going to cut cost. We're going to become strong on our defense. We're going to educate our children. We're going to have a wonderful economy. The stock market is going to skyrocket. And for most of the time, except a little bit under President Clinton and a little bit under President Ronald Reagan, that was just talk. We now have a point where it's no longer talk. There's a lot of action, and action people have never seen before. Even though Trump campaigned on it, they've never seen a new office in DOJ that has the power to go after frivolous spending in government and frivolous employees. And that's a little bit scary for politicians, federal workers and federal contractors. I can't say too much, but it's uncertain. But it's also uncertain for liberal bishops in the Episcopal Church, for which there are so many, George. Many. I want to go through some of this. You have a list of 4 bishops here and what they're doing. I want to take these one at a time because you and I, as just minor Christians in the church, can counter their arguments without too much trouble. Bishop of Los Angeles calls Trump's actions grotesque in meeting with Zelensky. He is completely offended that we're not taking Ukraine's side in the war in launching nuclear attacks against Russia. What was his expectations here? I don't know. Tell me about the Bishop of Los Angeles, George.
John Harvey Taylor is a dyed-in-the-wool liberal. He actually at one time was the head of the Nixon Library in San Clemente, California. So he is a paid-up member of the blob, if you will, of the deep state, and who got religion, became a priest, and is now the Bishop of Los Angeles. Diocese, very liberal. And after President Trump's meeting with Zelensky, he put out a letter, which we published on Anglican Inc., where he just tore into Donald Trump, saying Trump's behavior was outrageous, his demeanor, he was dressing down. In other words, it was obvious that the bishop only watched the 3-minute clip rather than the 45 minutes run up to it. And
it happens.
But the point is that the bishop was basically arguing, we will fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. And that, Ukraine is, it's God's mission and all this. In other words, it wasn't surprising. This is the sort of stuff we see from the neocons and the Never Trumpers and the Lindsey Grahams in the Republican Party, that we must at all times and all places support Ukraine to diminish the Russian bear. I just don't think funding a war of attrition that's turning into a World War I type attrition where thousands of people each week are dying, young men are dying for no appreciable gains, is the moral thing. I would rather have a bad peace than war. It's my thinking.
Well, let me back you up here. If what you are doing doesn't work, try something else. Mm-hmm. Can I tell you, that's how we defeated the Soviet Union? Mm-hmm. President Reagan got into office and said, we need to talk to the Soviet leaders, and we need to reduce the amount of missiles we have aimed at each other. We have mutually assured destruction. If they launch, we launch, they launch, and it's over. Okay? We can't have that as an anxiety of our people, and we need to talk and get it taken care of. By the way, I'm going to create something that doesn't really exist called Star Wars Initiative, and we will fake out the Soviet Union at the same time, but let's talk. And over the course of his administration, he talked to Mikhail Gorbachev and got Mikhail to agree to the SALT treaties, which is great. We made a last-minute ditch and got Turkey, which is 20 minutes by ballistic missile outside of Moscow, to take on some of our nuclear missiles at the time. Pershing 2s, I think they were. And what a marvelous ploy, to the point where the Soviet Union had no choice but to go to war or break apart. And for reasons that you could write books about, the Soviet Union fell apart, but they were still holding on to Berlin. They were still holding on to that Iron Curtain, and at the time, a deal was made between George Bush I and Mikhail Gorbachev that said, listen, if you take down that wall in Berlin, we promise not to move NATO any further east. We're going to stop right there. No further east we'll go. It did not take but one more president, Bill Clinton, to undo that. Bill Clinton said, we'll take NATO as far east as we want onto the shores of Russia. But these are the histories that we've completely forgotten about. Ukraine is not something that happened 4 years ago. Ukraine was a building up war of concentrated politics that's been existing since the fall of the Soviet Union. And to write, as the Bishop of Los Angeles does, that Trump is on the wrong side of history and you shouldn't treat Zelensky this way, you really need to have more context of how we got the bear so angry at us. Now, I think the bear was wrong. Okay, let me be honest here. The bear was wrong to do what they did. But now we're in a World War I trench warfare where thousands of Russian and Ukrainians die every day.
For a European audience used to European press, John Harvey Taylor's letter, Bishop of Los Angeles' letter, will not seem extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Because this is what many of their political elites are saying. And some of our elites in the United States are saying the same things as well. And I'm psychoanalyzing this or trying to read his mind, which I shouldn't. Mm-hmm. But part of the bishop, I sense in the bishop's anger. You can disagree with the whole issue, but we're not touching upon a deep well of anger that we see in the Europeans, we see in the neocons in the United States, we see in the Bishop John Harvey Taylor's Los Angeles, part of the deep state types. And that is basically Donald Trump is saying the settled world order is over. That era you were talking about, a very famous book by Francis Fukuyama came out called The End of History, where history would continue, of course, but it would be a liberal, progressive history. We're not going to have big events, big things anymore. We're not going to have great men of history, the sort of people that Thomas Carlyle, the 19th century philosopher, talked about, where great men drive history. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump has basically put paid to that notion. And we are now in a new world where Donald Trump is almost a repeat of Henry Kissinger's foreign policy of what is in it for the United States. Now, the United States has always been in for what is in it for the United States, but now we're not cloaking it with moralism. We're not cloaking it with this is how the domestic order should be. we're not cloaking it with things like international law, which don't really exist. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump is playing pure power politics. And this destruction of the old order is what has upset the Germans so much. It's what's upset the English elites, what the BBC can't stand. And it's upset the Bishop of Los Angeles.
Yes, and it's let's talk about some more upset bishops. We got a list of them here. The Bishop of Maine backs the governor of Maine's call against Trump for banning men participating in women's sports. I hope you don't mind if I reworded your sentence there a little bit on the fly.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, there was a governor's meeting 2.5 weeks ago, and the governor of Maine was seated about 2 or 3 rows back, and the Maine has decided to ignore the executive order by President Donald Trump forbidding men from participating in women's sports. And he took her to task in front of all the other governors, embarrassed her. But Bishop of Maine says, I think my governor's on the right side. Clearly, we have a phenomenon nowadays where God has lost focus, and he's starting to put people in the wrong bodies. And your soul could turn up in the wrong sex upon birth. And we as citizens need to fix that, George. And that must be the argument here.
Well, Thomas Brown, the Bishop of Maine, is one of 2 partnered male gay bishops in the Episcopal Church at this time. I think there's only 2? Yeah.
Okay.
And
I would have thought with all the effort they would have like 15 or 20 now.
Well, Gene Robinson's retired and Mary Glasspool's retired.
Okay.
And I can't think of anybody else. But Bishop Brown is a very progressive man. He's a partnered gay man. Mm-hmm. And he is a supporter of the transgender movement. He believes that you are what you say you are. President Trump signed an executive order saying the federal government will not send funds to states for educational purposes that where the state requires school districts to permit men to participate in women's sports. So it's not a cut-up of...
I'll make that a simpler sentence. You will not receive federal fundings for your school if you allow men or boys to participate in female sports.
Yeah. So it's not talking about welfare payments or Social Security or defense, but nothing like that. It's just in this area where the president has discretion. He's saying if you want to have boys competing, fine, go ahead, do it, but don't expect a dime from the federal government to support whatever you're doing. And the Bishop of Maine, President Trump called out the governor of Maine for basically thumbing her nose at the president. And there was a little exchange back and forth. And the President Trump, of course, is so good on the fly with put downs and insults. Well, the Bishop of Maine wrote a letter that was published, and we put it up on Anglican Inc., where he basically congratulated the governor of Maine for fighting the good fight and doing the right thing and supporting men in women's sports. Now, I'm not in the least surprised by an Episcopal bishop being this so out of touch. If you listen to the commentators following the president's address to joint session of Congress, he's painted the Democrats in support. This is an issue where 80% of the public are against men participating in girls' sports. President had a guest, a young girl who had received brain damage in a volleyball game from a 6'6" man spiking a ball into her face at a volleyball game. And the Democrats were painted into a corner of backing women, men in women's sports. The Bishop of Maine chose to tie himself to this issue. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I'm thinking, oh, God, how could you be so stupid? But there you go.
George, last week we mentioned the new podcast that Gavin Newsom is conducting. And he had Charlie Kirk on the other day. And The conversation went to men participating in women's sports, and you know what Gavin Newsom admitted? It's unfair. Strike! Oh my gosh! Stroke! So put on the spot, he could not defend it, even though his wife makes $1.5 million a year contract as a consultant for transgendered sports. So pretty cool. This podcast will be his undoing, or he will be the next Ronald Reagan from California. Whatever, I don't know what's gonna happen there.
I think he must be running for president in 2028 because he's basically stuck a knife in the back of the. He's the leading, if you will, liberal. He's a leading Democratic politician right now, governor of the largest state, and he's dumped the issue.
Jesse Brown, is his name Jesse Brown? Who was the famous black activist in the 70s and 80s? Was it Jesse Brown?
Willie Brown?
Willie Brown, maybe? No, it's Jesse Jackson.
Jesse Jackson.
Jesse Jackson. He was really famous for something I saw in 1982 and 1983, covered by CNN and all the mainline press at the time. He said that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were refugees, and that they were homeless, and that they were going to go to the main town of Jerusalem because they had no place to go. And I'm like, wow,
It was his speech at the 1984 Democratic Convention.
Yeah,
I think it was in San Francisco.
Yeah,
the one where Michael Dukakis was the nominee. And he talked about Jesus, the Holy Family being refugees, and that Mary was an unwed mother. And because of this, we had to have compassion on unwed mothers and illegal immigrants.
Yeah. So you remember that too.
80 or 84.
Yeah. And I've heard that cry many times. And when I hear it, I like to refute it with context and biblical narrative and stuff like that. We'll get a chance to do that here. But we're not going to refute Jesse Jackson. He's kind of out of the scope right now. But the Bishop of the Mid-Atlantic calls Jesus and the Holy Family refugees against immigration plans. And we need to talk a little bit about this because we want to put this in biblical context. But George, tell me a little bit about the Bishop of the Mid-Atlantic.
Well, we can't leave the ACNA out of the bishop's follies. Because Donald Trump is best driving every issue out there, and the national churches, ACNA, Episcopal Church, they don't have their meetings for another year or two. We don't hear a unified voice. We just hear the leaders talk. And the Bishop of the Mid-Atlantic, Chris Harper, I want to say, I may have
That's all right, yeah.
Put out an Ash Wednesday letter saying, I've been asked about this on the issue of immigration. And he leads off by saying that when there was the massacre of the innocents by Herod, the Holy Family became refugees when they fled to Egypt. Pause. And then he adopts that analogy, that historical incident, to modern politics, saying, therefore, since Jesus was a refugee, we must do this, that, and the other for modern refugees, both legal and illegal. And, the Reverend Jackson, as William F. Buckley used to say it, was a little more flamboyant, but basically Chris Harper's making the Jesse Jackson argument for the Democratic National Convention in San Francisco again. But it's from the ACNA bishop.
Yeah, but it's a, I don't want to say common mistake to make contextually, that Jesus was a refugee. Let's go back in the time of the Roman Empire and understand that Rome was the federation. Rome was a collection of provinces and states. And one of those collections was Egypt. One was Israel, Jerusalem, Judea, whatever you want to call it, and many others. And if you want to look at it in context of state, when Jesus, Joseph, and Mary fled by the request of the angel, they didn't flee from one country like, let's pick one out of Congo, and come to another country, Canada. No, they went from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, to what would be a good Nile reference here in America, Iowa. Okay, the Egyptian Nile here of America is Iowa, because there was no laws against immigration. We had Pax Romana. Travel amongst the citizens of Rome was free and frequent. You were allowed to do it. Jesus, Joseph, and Mary were not breaking any laws when the angel asked them to flee. Were they refugees in the sense that they had left their home? Absolutely. Now, if you want to define refugees as somebody who had to pick up and leave home for years until they heard from the angel again, I would grant that. But if you want to put it in context that Jesus, Joseph, and Mary had to make a moral decision to be illegal in a different country, that doesn't apply. That's not this. That they lived under Roman peace and Pax Romana.
We've had throughout the centuries we have internal migration. We had the Okies moving from Oklahoma in the 20s out to California.
That's right. Yeah.
We have people moving from California today to Texas and Florida. Our county, York County, are filled with refugees from New York, New Jersey, and Illinois retiring to Florida. People move. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph could return and did return to Israel. The wonderful thing about God's providence, say for in the book of Acts, is the Apostle Paul could start in, if you will, in Antioch and go all the way, the gospel could spread without hindrance of border, all the way to Rome or to Spain or to France, modern France. The road system was maintained by the Romans. The laws were the Romans. The language, everything it was a universal state, and the concept, the modern understanding of refugee, is that's a historical anachronism to try to apply it back. It's a bad argument, because if we want to get into the biblical stuff, the Bible's the Bible is clear that we should be kind and treat the stranger in our midst, the foreigner who sojourns with us, according to our laws. But that foreigner is there lawfully and legally. That foreigner is not violating our laws. The modern Episcopal, and it now seems the ACNA thing of that there is no such thing as an illegal alien, all must be treated as if they have a right to be here. That can't be defended from Scripture.
No.
It can only be taken and twisted to follow a modern political sensibility that would be totally alien to the context, as you said, Kevin, of the Scripture's historicity.
If you want to define a refugee as somebody who's fleeing persecution, I'm not high enough up the food chain or the pay chain to argue that. If you want to argue somebody is a refugee because they're in a country illegally, that's where contextually through Scripture and history, we need to talk a little bit.
Am I a refugee, Kevin, because I had to flee the Diocese of Pennsylvania 30 plus years ago because of being a conservative, and I had to go to Florida? Or my parents, were they refugees when they retired to Florida? I mean, how you can overuse this word and twist the Bible to. There's a terrible, and I think the bishop's done it here, of having a political idea, then searching through the Bible to try to find some justification for it, for proof texting. When you rip a text out of the Scripture to make a modern political point, I think you're doing violence to Scriptures and God's words.
I'm not going to use the word violence because I'm not clergy, but I would say that you're doing a disservice to the history of that we've sojourned forth. However, I lost my train of thought. That never happens. however. So in, conception of this, it's I wouldn't mind you guys going on Anglican.inc and posting comments. Now I have to step back a little bit because I'm in Maryland right now, and the church I go to is Christ Church Echo Key. And who's my bishop, George?
It must be Chris Harper.
Oh, so I'm trying,
No,
it's not. It's Chris Harper. So I'm trying to be a little careful. I've only met him once, and you and I have this rule that our bishops are the safest people. But this was a little bit of just a bridge too far, in my opinion. However, one more bishops playing politics. The Episcopal Church, presiding bishop, I assume, joins a lawsuit seeking to block ICE enforcements in churches. Sanctuary.
Number of dioceses have joined as parties of interest in a lawsuit started by the Quakers, the Mennonites, and I think a Jewish organization, where ICE has removed a rule, a self-determined rule, that they will not raid churches in the search for illegal criminal aliens. And these churches have filed a lawsuit saying that rule needs to be reinstated because religious places need to be sanctuaries from arrest. Now, in the medieval world, you could run and put your hand on the altar, and that would be sanctuary. That has never been part of American life or culture. And I'd like to joke that the churches that are pushing this are the ones that need these people to show up. So if our building, our Episcopal Church will be empty unless we say illegal aliens welcome here and you can't get arrested. It's the only way they'll get anybody in the congregation. But, we published on Anglican Inc. a letter from the Chancellor of Northern California explaining why they were doing this, because they felt that it was the right thing to do, and they felt that this was the church's role to be welcoming to immigrants, and that the government didn't have a right that the church should. It's a funny thing. They're making an argument of the church's independence from the state that they would not make in 99 other arguments of, should the churches be taxed? Should the churches have to pay real estate tax? Should the churches, should priests not be subject to the same laws as lay men and women?
Yeah.
They would never support that, but when it comes to illegal aliens, yeah, they do.
Let's move on. Archbishop Cottrell, we have never learned how to properly pronounce his name. Even if people will tell us it's Cottrell, I still can't do it. I can't. The next show, I completely butcher the name. You know why? Because I'm just not good at names. It's who I am. Archbishop Cottrell and other bishops denounce plans to cut foreign aid to build up the military budget in the UK. Now, a lot's happened since Trump has been inaugurated here. And one of the things is he's trying to get NATO and other countries to pay their fair share. I can't believe I said that, George. I don't like saying pay your fair share. But he's like, listen, England, Italy, Spain, name the NATO country. You guys aren't giving what you promised to give when NATO was formed. And NATO is designed to protect Europe, more than certainly America, from any future wars. And can you raise up a little bit more cash? And the very liberal, almost insane leader of the UK has said, yes, I will.
I will not judge Keir Starmer's motives, but I think he's raising the money because he realizes America's pulling their cash out. Keir Starmer has said, we're going to put British boots on the ground in Ukraine. We're going to, join this war. And with Britain's 132 tanks, that'll last an hour and a half, 2 hours in the battle. But Stephen Cottrell is thinking, or Cottrell is engaged in magical thinking. He's just put out a prayer for Ukraine that they stay safe and independent, and basically, we will fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, and we will spend our treasure and troops and talent to make this happen. But then in another breath, he's saying, but we can't cut our foreign aid budget because we need to engage in soft power around the world, which is so effective. Now, I personally believe that foreign aid is a scam. It's taking money from the poorest people in your country and giving it to wealthy people in other countries. And this notion of soft power is magical thinking. It's magical thinking. Might means makes right in the world of power politics today, in the world of Putin and Chairman Xi and Donald Trump. And to think that by sending money so that you can line the coffers of a dictator's checkbook in Switzerland, who resides in Africa, you're not advancing anything. No. So right now, Starmer says we'll increase defense spending to 2.5%, rising it to 3% at the next parliament. This will generate an additional £13 billion for defense, and we'll pay for it by reducing the foreign aid budget by 0.5% of GDP to 0.3% of GDP. And Cottrell is saying, no, we need both guns and butter. We need both to alleviate, we can't take money from poor people who need money, British pensioners who are being shafted by the government over winter housing allowance, fuel allowance. We need to pay that. We need to pay for all these illegal aliens coming into the country. We need to pay for an increase in the defense budget. We need to fund the war in Ukraine. And we need to continue sending money to Africa, where, Britain sends foreign aid to India and China. What are they thinking? But Cottrell is not immune from the American bishop's problem of magical political thinking.
Yes, but when I see a story like this, I say, why is the church so concerned about federal money? I think the church should be completely separated from federal money. Shouldn't rely on it like we do here in America, sadly. That we should not have NGOs that are church-run and government-funded. In my understanding of Judeo-Christian history, the more you have government with your coffers, the less church you really have. Mm-hmm. Just a humble opinion. Okay, I learned something new today in our pre-show, George, and this is part of our next story. Archbishop Kaziimba says no to polygamy in a sermon. And come on, Christians don't allow polygamy anywhere, especially in the Church of Uganda, of course. However, let me continue the sentence. To Parliament on Ash Wednesday, and the Parliament was Uganda. So he told the Uganda government, listen, I say we need to stop supporting at a federal level polygamy. I did not know that Uganda allowed it at a federal level, that the country of Uganda allowed for polygamy. I thought it was stopped a long time ago because the church stopped it. Wrong, huh?
Well, Islam has polygamy in Uganda. Sure. And Uganda is revamping its family laws, its marriage laws. And this is all in the context of the wider law to criminalize homosexuality that got Justin Welby all worked up about a year or two ago. It's all part of the same package of a reform of family laws. And one of the proposals put forward is to allow polygamy to be sanctioned by the state, so that civil and secular inheritance laws, family laws, all the things that are like that. And Kaziimba is saying, no, we can't do this. And he listed, the Christian reasons against polygamy, how the Christian church had to fight this battle for several generations to basically say, no, we're not going to acculturate and allow polygamy because it's what we find in the culture. And Kaziimba makes the argument, this is what happens in New York City, where the culture says we need to allow gay marriage, and therefore the church says, I guess we need to be nice, so we'll go along with it. Kaziimba saying we need to take the hit and stand against something that culture wants, in this case, polygamy. And as an aside, every so often at the Lambeth conferences, we have some nut job American or Western bishop saying, oh, I can remember after Lambeth 98, the bishop of East Carolina came back and said, oh, I met a polygamous bishop. He had his 2 wives. And I happen to know the bishop he was referring to.
Yeah.
The bishop brought his wife and his mother-in-law because the wife had an infant baby. So she brought her mother-in-law, and the man couldn't tell the difference between the two. Okay. Story stopped. Kaziimba also goes on to say that polygamy is inherently destructive on women. It demeans women. It lowers their status in society. It essentially makes them property of a man. And a modern Christian nation cannot permit that, because in God's eyes, men and women are equal, and we need to have that equality enshrined in the law. So Kaziimba took his spot on the national spotlight to drive home the fact that the Church of Uganda stands squarely against legalization of polygamy. Problem is, there's a Muslim minority, and the Muslims want polygamy.
Absolutely.
So they'll probably have to. So they'll probably have to have 2 laws: Muslim family law and non-Muslim family law. But they are quite keen that from non-Muslims, no polygamy.
You're not saying
as recognized by the state.
They would have Ugandan law and Sharia law.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And now, will this change? No, I mean, it's like California. California follows a form of polygamy, except it's serial polygamy. You can keep getting married, divorce, married, divorce. You don't have more than one at one time, and there will be informal arrangements throughout history. But the state sanctioning something makes it good in the eyes of some people, and the church wants to make sure it's not sanctioned.
Okay. We have alluded to the next story several times in the last 3 or 4 weeks that South Africa is experiencing apartheid 2.0, and it's basically falling apart before our eyes. And we have viewers who live in South Africa, some who write and say yes, but you guys don't know the half of it. It's much worse than you guys are reporting. Some say who live in South Africa and different parts of South Africa. What are you talking about? I don't see this on our news. Are you sure you guys know what you're talking about? And let's update the story a little bit. I sent you the video of one of the leaders of South Africa,
Julius Malema.
Yep, he tells whites to go to America, take Trump's offer, get out of here, because we are going to take your land without compensation. Okay. Also says, by the way, government's out of money. I don't know if you heard of this thing in America called the USAID. They don't send our money anymore, so we can't pay our 17,000 school teachers. I did not know we were funding the entire school teacher population of South Africa, and there's many more bullet points here. But let's talk a little bit about the story that, and I get this. You and I are journalists, and we're kind of French journalists because we tell you what's going on. We don't hold a party line except for maybe our Christian bias. But yeah, if you live in South Africa, you may not know this, George.
I think we need to start out by saying that the problem is not black-white, as I see it. The problem is the ruling African National Congress and their allies, the Economic Freedom, EFF, Economic Freedom Foundation Forum, whatever it is. These parties in Parliament are driving racism. I think there are 140 federal laws that are racist in the sense that they do not allow whites the same liberties as blacks. Something called BE, Black Economic Empowerment. And what the vision of Nelson Mandela of a colorblind state has not been a reality for 20 odd years. What we have is a kleptocracy where the African National Congress leaders are thieves. They have government jobs and ministers for each and every person Meanwhile, the South African army has no air cover in their fight in the Congo against the M23 rebels, so that South African soldiers cannot be medevaced or evacuated after they've been wounded in battle, because the money is spent down in Johannesburg and Cape Town by the generals, who never really were generals, on luxuries. The corruption in South Africa is atrocious. One of the leading... There's an article in our local paper that made it here because we have a citrus industry here. And they talked about, and we compete with South Africa. If you go into the grocery store, you will find South African oranges and citrus products.
From Florida. Yeah, it's weird.
In Florida, because it's not the season yet. I mean, we the stuff's still growing on the trees. Or it's just starting. One of the largest citrus producers in South Africa was... the farm was reclaimed by squatters. And so a multi-million-dollar citrus exporting thing whose product has been on our grocery shelves has basically been completely shut down because the land was taken over by people who had no right to it. The police did not help or intervene. And so this citrus production, which gave, thousands of jobs down the pipeline to people in South Africa, from picking it, processing it, packing it, shipping it, so on. It's all stopped. South Africa is falling apart before our eyes. And the parts of the country where the water system has fallen apart, the electricity is off. I lived in Durban for 3 months. It's a beautiful city. And now the pictures of it, it looks like St. Louis or Detroit or Camden, New Jersey at its worst. We have pockets like that, but here's the thing. It's uneven. There are parts of South Africa that are doing well, and it's not a pure black and white thing. Oh. There are, it's not a race thing anymore, except the people in power use race to stir up mob violence against their enemies and against people. And what's going to happen is that South Africa is going to drive away both the white and the black and the Indian and the colored educated people who don't want to have this for their children. And they want to have a good future. And they'll head to America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, other places. There's white South African farmers who've moved to Nigeria. And the government has set up partnerships with them to farm land, because they know what they're doing, and the Nigerians, they want the income. And the church is silent. The church is silent about this. The Anglican Church has been in bed with the ANC for so long, its leadership, that I don't think they can recognize what's happening. Maybe because if all you do is you turn on the South African Broadcasting Corporation, you won't see this news. No.
All right, George, we're at 52 minutes already. And look at all the stories we have left. Okay.
Let's go.
Okay. So I say we cut 6. Story 6. Okay. We're going to move on to 7. Unless you want to skip 7 and go to 8.
Yeah, let's skip 7. If we have time, we can come back to it.
We'll come to it. Okay. Story 8 of 11. Calvin Robinson is the subject to many heat pieces by left-wing British press. The American press is finally leaving him alone. That's good. But they're calling him the oddball cleric. Calvin Robinson, if you've been following our program for any amount of time in the last 2 or 3 years, know who he is. He was a journalist for the GB. He is wanted to be a Church of England rector, was denied that journey by people within the Church of England. He jumped over to
Free Church of England.
Free Church of England. They canned him. He came over here to America and got canned here as well. And he's a man right now without a country, for all intents and purposes. Calling him an oddball cleric by the press is a little weird to me, George. I think he's eccentric.
That's one of the nicer things. The British left-wing press has gotten hold of the Calvin Robinson story. Mm-hmm. And although I've read the British press for a long time, I'm still shocked by the vitriol and the hatred Calvin Robinson elicits in some quarters. Alan Roseberger, who used to be the publisher, the editor of The Guardian, wrote an op-ed piece for The Independent, just trashing Calvin with all sorts of half-truths and slanders and innuendos. And Searchlight, which is a Communist Party publication, I think it's a Communist Party publication, they just went after Calvin as a monster. Another publication, The New European, attacked Calvin because Brett Murphy is helping realize crowdfund money for Calvin to have a place to live, because when you lose your church, you lose your rectory, and Calvin needs a place to live. It's not so much there's anything new in this story. It's rather that the liberal press have decided to dance on Calvin's grave, kick his lifeless body, whatever the analogy you want to use. There's a degree of, there's some people who hate Calvin Robinson in the British press.
Oh, here in America too. I mean, there are people who do not like clerics who speak out on political issues, unless it's their side, as in the Bishop of Maine or the Bishop of Los Angeles. If you're on side, you're allowed to speak. But Calvin Robinson is not on side. He's taking a minority position in certainly the Church of England, and certainly here for the Western Church in America.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've just criticized 3 bishops because their politics don't match ours, and we think they were unwise. But we're not saying anything about their moral characters, anything like that. No. These guys in Britain are basically, it's ad hominem personal destruction that is being leveled at Calvin that is just so over the top. Where is this coming? Is he that dangerous to the status quo that he has to be destroyed? I don't know.
Well, in technical terms, going back to an earlier story, if he's persecuted, does not this make him a refugee?
Well, actually, if he went back to Britain, would he be murdered by Muslim zealots? Right. I hate to say that, but the rule of law no longer exists. I mean, there's a controversy going around right now where the sentencing commission that sort of gives recommended sentences for judges has come out with one standard for white males and a second standard for everybody else. Mm-hmm. So that you can be a pedophile rapist and get 2 years in prison, or you can be a white man and post an offensive meme on Facebook and get 7 years in prison, or a woman. So there is, the government has vigorously denied that there's a 2-tier system of justice. Now we have it now on black and white in paper.
Yeah, well, come on. Yeah. Clearly, there's a 2-tier justice system. Still, statistically, you're more likely to be arrested in the UK for something you post on the internet than in Russia.
What an interesting thing that is occurring is that Tommy Robinson, who's been in solitary confinement now, I don't know how many months, and the British law says you can only be in there for a few days. Yeah. Jordan Peterson and some other notable commentators in the United States, Peterson's Canadian, but he's based in the US now, are basically turning to the Trump administration to say, look, you've got to intervene because Tommy Robinson will die in prison for free speech crime unless you intervene. So if we put that in the context, if that Calvin Robinson is viewed the way Tommy Robinson is viewed, no relation, then yes, Calvin would be a refugee under those circumstances. Because he can't go back right now, if that's the world in which he would return to.
On to our next story. I apologize right now, we're going to go over time. A lot of you guys are just like Joe Rogan, 3 hours every time you sit down. Sorry. That's who we are. King Charles, sausage fingers.
Can I say, I apologize for calling Joe Rogan fat and bald. He is bald and jowly, but he's not fat.
Yeah, he's more muscle tone than I do. I have tummy tone. A lot of good tummy talk. You got tummy talk.
Kevin, you ride a bike 3 hours a day. Friends, don't let him tease you. He's an athlete.
Okay. In my mind, I am. All right. King Charles, sausage fingers, has been silent about Ash Wednesday. Not really surprised. He's not really taken up the mantra of the church that his mother did. Bless her. May she rest in peace. But he hosted a Ramadan celebration at Windsor Castle. Oh, I can see the strokes happening now amongst some of our UK viewers. This is different. I did not expect this, nor did I see it coming yet, but it is the trajectory of the UK, George. I see it on the streets when I see video coming out of London. I don't see white Caucasians the way I used to 10, 15, 20 years ago.
You remember about a year or two ago, J.D. Vance made a joke that the first Muslim power to have nuclear weapons would be the UK. I don't think it's a joke anymore.
No, I think we're close. All right, well, let's talk about this.
Okay, Lent was Wednesday, and Ash Wednesday was Wednesday, and King Charles is the protector of the Church of England. He is the titular head of the Church of England. Mm-hmm. He had no Lenten message, no Ash Wednesday message, nothing like that on his social media. But earlier in the week, it was all over his social media. Beginning of Ramadan is here, and a big celebration at Windsor, Windsor
Castle, yeah,
and it's the same with the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer is full of effusive greetings for Ramadan and statements. I know how you feel persecuted because of the plight of the Gazans and all this and that. Again, nothing from the British Prime Minister about the start of Lent and Ash Wednesday. Gavin Ashenden was on GB News and basically saying, look, Charles, just be truthful. If you have converted to Islam, tell us now. Or maybe it's time you did what your uncle did, and your great uncle, and abdicate for the sake of the monarchy. Because if he continues, there are comments. I have no way of judging the truthfulness of the strength of them, but there are comments from monarchists who are saying, unless Charles goes now, it's the end of the monarchy as we know it in Britain. William will not have anything left when it's his turn to be king, because Charles is doing such a destructive job through his idiocy.
Well, I mean, in all intensive purposes here, he's just a representative. He doesn't really hold the authority other than character-wise and some morality-wise to tell the government to do anything. I mean, he's just a figurehead. And I think that is seen more in him than any monarch I can think of in Europe. That he's just, a figurehead.
He's become like this king of Sweden or the king of Norway, just, somebody who's the antics of their children and family make these sort of tittle-tattle magazines, but has no role or consequence in the life of the nation. Now, if that's what Britain wants, then that's, it's no skin off our nose. We got rid of the king 250 years ago. So
no regrets.
We're not looking to replace him. No regrets.
No regrets.
But this is dangerous. And you just contrast. I mean, Donald Trump had an Ash Wednesday message, which was very, very well written. Mm-hmm. Very well, it's a Christian message. Marco Rubio on Ash Wednesday appeared in a Fox 2 News interview to talk about foreign policy, and he had just been to church and still had his little cross on his forehead. And whether that's parading your piety in public, I wouldn't want to guess, because I don't know what's in his soul. But without having a state religion in the United States, our leaders are more overtly Christian than the King of England is, and he's supposed to be the head of the church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's finish up some stories here. We talked many times, but not too recently, about Bernard Randall. He was a cleric, school teacher, who was let go, and a court tribunal said, listen, you were let go because you're just a piece of crap. And we find out that the court may have been biased. How could that be possible in all the...
How could that be possible?
How could that be possible? So he gets a second chance, George.
Bernard Randall was chaplain at Trent College, a private school under the Church of England Foundation. He was let go after the headmaster accused him of essentially bigotry and terrorism for teaching the Church of England's line on human sexuality and having the audacity to tell children to think for themselves, not just follow the gay Stonewall agenda on every issue here. And Libby Lane, the dreadful Bishop of Derby, refused to support him and back him, and he took his firing to an employment tribunal, and the tribunal basically said, well, of course you're offensive, and of course you're wrong and evil, and of course you should be referred to the police as a terrorist because you don't buy into the gay agenda.
There's a cell right next to Tommy Robinson, and you should be in it. That's
essentially that's what the tribunal said. Well, this was taken up on appeal. Christian Legal Foundation, Andrea Minachillo Williams, I think. Please, I hope I didn't mess that one up, but helped him with this. And an appeals court said, yes, you were wronged, that the tribunal was biased. It was horrific how they treated you. So we got to give you another shot. So he was vindicated, and he now has to present his case again. But at the same token, he now has a chance. Whereas before, the employment law basically said that Christians are outcasts and are crazy people.
Another refugee. That's crazy. Right. And they all come from the same place, George. All right, our last story of the day. Cardinal Fernandez says that, and he's Roman Catholic, Cardinal Fernandez says that sex change surgery may be permissible in some cases. And if you can find some case, it's not too far from all cases. This is a big shift in the Roman Catholic Church. I'm sure many of our Roman Catholic viewers are as ecstatic as we are to hear this, George.
Had been, that's the Catholic teaching, that sex was immutable. You're made a man, you're made a woman. And of course, there were these odd, 1 in a million intersex people, but we're not talking about that. Mm-hmm. And the Cardinal Fernandez has basically clarified Catholic teaching on this point, and he's head of the dicastery, used to be called the Holy Office, the office that Cardinal Ratzinger held before he became Pope Benedict XVI, that teaches Catholic doctrine. And he essentially said, well, that universal statement, we're going to pull back a bit, because there may be cases where surgery for sex changes may be permissible in some cases and be a moral good. And Kevin, as you were saying, once it can be permissible in some, where does it stop being permissible?
Yeah, I mean, geez. Come on. Now, here is a great opportunity. You patient audience, thank you. We're about almost an hour and 10 minutes in, but I'm giving you an assignment. I don't care if you use AI. I don't care if you go talk to your priest, or if your priest, you know the answer. But here we're going to have a little fun. In the comment section, answer the question, does your soul have a gender or a sex? Be fun to hear you guys to work that out. I know the answer. I don't know if George does. But one of those fun little questions that we're going to try and have you answer each week. Just a great theological question. George, that's all the stories. What a great week we've had. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
And I'm George Conger. And you've been watching episode 904 of Anglican Unscripted.